Well, good morning and welcome to Bring Your Pets to Church Sunday here at Redemption Online. I've got mine. Come here, boy. Come on, Milo. There we go. This is Milo. He's my golden retriever, dog. He really likes being picked up. One of his favorite things, right, buddy? Yeah. Can you do anything? We're just gonna let you slide. Okay, goodbye. Thanks for coming out. So, Bring Your Pet to Church Sunday is pretty simple. Shouldn't be that tired. He's not that heavy. He's heavier than he looks. That was like 250 pounds probably that I was just holding there. So here's how Bring Your Pet to Church Sunday works. All you need to do is take a picture of your pet watching the service sometime during the service today. You email it in to me, and next week's we'll post some of the photos, and somebody will win a prize for them and their furry or fuzzy or scaly, whatever type of friend it is that they have. So that's Bring Your Pet to Church Sunday. A few other quick announcements to let you know of. I'm working on technology to be able to visit you as a hologram or maybe as a robot that is sanitized. I haven't yet been able to come up with exactly what that's going to look like. So, but we are still progressing with technology. We can take e-transfers now as a church. So we're a little ways away from the hologram or sanitized robot, but if you want to send an e-transfer for your giving, now we have that as an alternative option to PayPal. If you've given through PayPal before, it's secure. You can link your bank account to it. You can also give with a credit card. E-transfers save us the administration fees on gifts that come in that way. So if you go to redemptioncommunity.ca/give, you can find all the instructions there. There's also a little form you can fill out so that you can put in the question and answer that you have for the security of your e-transfer and send it in a different format than the e-transfer itself, just as an added layer of security. So those details are there. If you are someone who gives to Redemption or has given in the past, thank you for your generosity. It is a blessing as we continue to move forward with our vision to be a family-serving, community-blessing, world-reaching church working with all hands on deck to see disciples made for the first time and for a lifetime. I also wanted to let you know that as we look outside of our community, the Esperanza trip that we plan every year, normally around the first week of July, of course it's up in the air just like everything else right now. Will we be allowed to travel within the province at that point in time? We do know Esperanza has canceled all their camps for the summer, but that doesn't change the fact that they get like 300 feet of rain every year and it takes its toll on the facilities. And so we may or may not be able to send a group that is small up there, but if you're interested in the first week of July in being aware of what's going on with the potential of an Esperanza trip as the next few weeks unfold, please contact me and I'll let you know what it is you have to do to be involved in that. One other thing that I want to do is I want to invite Brent and Adina to come on down. Yeah, come on. Yeah. Oh, here they come. There we go. It's so good to have you guys here. This is Brent and Adina. They're new members at Redemption. They've been a part of Redemption for a number of years now, and we are thrilled to welcome them into membership. And so I'm going to give them here their membership mug. Hey, go on, take it. I think they're a little shy in front of a crowd. We'll get that to you guys later. I hope you're having a good morning so far and that it's going to get a bit better. I am not going to tell you to go and open your notes tab as we move into the worshiping through song portion of our service. Don't open that notes tab, but do crank the volume up. I think you're going to like this a lot. Let's worship together.
People come together, strangers, neighbors, but is one. His kingdom come. So don't let your heart be troubled. Hold your head up high, don't fear no evil. Fix your eyes on this one true. God is madly in love with you. So take courage, hold on, be strong. Remember where our help comes from. Oh, 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 Swing wide, all you heavens. Let the praise go up as the walls come down. All creation, everything with breath, repeat the sound. All his children, clean hands, pure hearts, good grace, good God. His name is Jesus. Oh, swing wide, all you heavens. Let the praise go up as the walls come down. All these children, everything with breath, repeat the sound. All his children, clean hands, pure hearts, good grace, good God. His name is Jesus. Oh, swing wide, all you heavens. Let the praise go up as the walls come down. All creation, everything with breath, repeat the sound. All his children, clean hands, pure hearts, good grace, good God. His name is Jesus. Oh, 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 Jesus, our redemption, our salvation is in his blood. Jesus, light of heaven, friend forever, his kingdom come. Before I spoke a word, you were singing over me. You have been so, so good to me. Before I took a breath, you breathed your life in me. You have been so, so good to me. And oh, the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God. Oh, it chases me down, fights till I'm found, leaves the 99. I couldn't earn it, and I don't deserve it. Still you give yourself away. Oh, the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God. Yeah. foe, still your love far from me. You have been so, so good to me. When I found no worth, you paid it all for me. Yes, you did. Oh, you have been so, so good to me. Oh, the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God. Oh, it chases me down, fights till I'm found, leaves the 99. I don't deserve it, I don't deserve it. Still you give yourself away. Oh, the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God. There's no shadow you won't light up, mountain you won't climb up, coming after me. There's no wall you won't kick down, lie you won't tear down, coming after me. There's no shadow you won't light up, mountain you won't climb up, coming after me. There's no wall you won't kick down, lie you won't tear down, coming after me. Oh, there's no shadow you won't light up, mountain you won't climb up, coming after me. There's no wall you won't kick down, lie you won't tear down, coming after me. Oh, there's no shadow you won't light up, mountain you won't climb up, coming after me. There's no wall you won't kick down, lie you won't tear down, coming after me. No, the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God. Oh, it chases me down, fights till I'm found, leaves the 99. And I don't deserve it, I don't deserve it. Still you give yourself away. Oh, the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God. Oh, the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God. Oh, it chases me down, fights till I'm found, leaves the 99. And I couldn't earn it, and I don't deserve it. Still you give yourself away. Oh, the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God. Cast my mind to Calvary, where Jesus bled and died for me. I see his wounds, his hands, his feet, my Savior on that cursed tree. Body bound Oh, praise the name of the Lord our God. Oh, praise his name forevermore. For endless days we will sing your praise. Oh Lord, oh Lord our God. And on the third, at break of dawn, the Son of Heaven rose again. Oh, trample death, where is your sting? The angels roar for Christ the King. Yeah. Oh, praise the name of the Lord our God. Oh, praise his name forevermore. For endless days we will sing your praise. Oh Lord our God. The name of the Lord our God. Praise his name forevermore. For endless days we will sing your praise. Oh Lord our God. He shall return in robes of white. The blazing sun shall pierce the night, and I will rise among the saints, my gaze transfixed on Jesus' face. Oh, praise the name of the Lord our God. Oh, praise his name forevermore. For endless days we will sing your praise. Oh Lord our God. Oh, praise. And oh, praise the name of the Lord our God. Oh, praise his name forevermore. For endless days we will sing your praise. Oh Lord our God. We sing, oh, praise. Oh, praise the name of the Lord our God. Praise his name forevermore. For endless days we will sing your praise. Oh Lord our God. Oh Lord our God. Oh Lord our God.
Now, wasn't that sweet? I'll let you know that the band came over last weekend, had a marathon session of songs. So we've got sets like that for the whole next month. I'm grateful for everyone who serves our church, who loves Jesus, who uses their gifts. And I mean, how awesome is it that we're going to get to enjoy that for the next month? And one of my favorite parts was that I got to see real people. It was real people. They were here. It was so exciting. Even from afar, they were here in real life. It doesn't take much to get me pumped anymore. And it was great to reconnect with them as friends, and I've loved my stay-at-home group on Tuesday nights. Been working our way through the 23rd Psalm, and just going verse by verse has been so awesome. And we've got a couple of stay-at-home groups going on in the church right now. If you want to get involved in one, or maybe you want to think about starting one, you can let me know, and I would love to get you connected. There's all sorts of video material and leaders material. It's all queued up and good to go. So we'd love to see more groups get started. If you have an interest in that or in being a part of one, let me know. But I was asking my group for prayer. We were going around near the end of our time, and I was asked what to pray for. And so I said, you know, everything's kind of getting wearing for everyone. Everyone's weary of technology, it seems. And so sermon prep and the process and the editings just felt a little more tiring lately. And Brent in our group aptly pointed out, you know, Brent who likes ice cream, yeah, he aptly pointed out that maybe if I didn't preach on the things that I've been preaching on the last couple of weeks, maybe I wouldn't find it quite so taxing. And I think he's on to something. It's been suffering for a couple of weeks, and then submission in marriage. And in prep this week, I came across a statement that I felt was pretty accurate. It says, usually the husband regards himself as head of the house, and pedestrians believe they have the right of way. And usually both of them are safe until they try to prove it, which I thought was pretty accurate. And I think preachers are usually safe until they take texts like these and decide to go multiple weeks on them. And if you wonder what kind of ideas go through my head as I prepare for Sundays, this is a snapshot of my Google history after I found that, quote, yes, I did consider getting hit by a car lightly for your amusement, but the vehicles that we have, the hoods are just too high. I wasn't sure about my vertical on that one. Been watching, you know, The Last Dance, and, you know, wishing I had mad hops, but I don't. So anyway, in my great wisdom, I thought, you know what, we're going to talk about this topic of submission in marriage. Sounds like so much fun. Why don't we do 2 weeks instead of one? So here's week number 2, and I'm actually going to give God the credit for that gem of an idea, because I don't think I ever would have come up with it on my own. But I am glad for it. It gave me the chance to receive some of your questions, some of your insights. I'm grateful for the number of emails that I got in. And we're going to look at those. And really, I can kind of boil them down. Hope you don't mind my grouping them together. It seems like the questions kind of boiled down to 2 main ones. So I'll try and address those. To get you caught up, if you weren't here last week, we started looking at 1 Peter 3, verse 1 and 2, where it says, wives, in the same way, submit to your own husbands, so that if any of them do not believe the word, they may be won over without words by the behavior of their wives, when they see the purity and reverence of your lives. Last week, we opened this one up, recognizing there is both a wide variety of interpretations in this passage, and there is also a range of ways that this has been used by men to justify nothing short of evil, abusive, domineering behavior, and that is unacceptable. And we looked at the covenantal picture that's in Ephesians 5, where it says that Christ is head of the church and husband is head of the wife, and recognizing that this picture is to be a living drama, the marriage covenant reflecting God's covenant love for his people. And the husband's self-sacrificing love for his wife is to picture Christ's self-sacrificing love for the church, and the church's voluntary, willful, joyful submission to her husband is meant to be a portrait of the church's voluntary submission to its head, Christ. And try as I did not settle the debate that is as old as the ink that was used to write these words, but we did open it up because as people of God's word, we have to consider what it says and do so carefully. And we open it up because as a community, it's important that we be a community where the challenging intersections of faith and life, Scripture and the practical realities we live through, that they be able to be explored from different perspectives, different backgrounds, at different paces, and even when we come to different convictions, that we put into practice that it still be possible that love remain. And so if you didn't see that sermon, it really does set the foundation for this one. So on our website, you can go and find that there. So here was one of the questions that came up in a couple of different forms, but if we boil it down, basically it's this question: if a husband is not living respectably, does that husband give up right to be head of the household? Does a wife have to submit to an ungodly husband, be it if he's addicted to drugs or alcohol, or maybe lazy, unemployed, even abusive? What does it look like for a wife to submit? And Let me start by saying that in answering the question in a format like this, I have to speak in generalities, with a recognition that each situation is unique and there's factors and there's nuances that need to be considered. And I was somewhat surprised, maybe I shouldn't have been, but reading several pastors' sermons, perspectives, commentators' comments, many are plain and just definitively state their views. One I came across said simply, my view, this is not my view, my view, this author said, is that a wife must submit to verbal and emotional abuse. But if the husband begins to harm her physically, she needs to call civil or church authorities. You're not going to find me saying something definitive like that. Now, I don't want to be found giving counsel so far the other direction that one would assume my conviction is simply if you're unhappy in your marriage, well, God's ultimate goal for you is that you be happy, and so go ahead and file the paperwork. I believe marriage is a sacred thing. It is meant to be permanent. It is a portrait of Christ's love for the church. It is not meant to be broken for anything short of exceptional circumstances. And even when the Bible would permit it, it doesn't necessarily require it. And having been to a number of marriage conferences and courses and classes, honestly, some of the most beautiful examples of the power of the gospel at work is when there has been brokenness in marriage and grounds for divorce, and yet reconciliation and forgiveness prevail. And I recognize the issues that lead to questions like this being asked are maybe very tightly interwoven with questions of whether it would be appropriate for separation or for divorce. And I really want to differentiate that I believe those are conversations that do need to happen sometimes, and there are individual conversations that need to happen with prayer and with trusted, mature Christian confidants. And so today, as I address it, it's being from the perspective not of whether or not there's a hard line where separation or divorce is the right thing to do for you, but in a situation where we're not talking about divorce or separation, but where there is unhappiness, where a husband is being ungodly in his behavior, not leading well, does a wife then in that situation still submit if they're married? And to that, I would say yes.
And really quickly say that I want you to not shut this off before I have the chance to explain why and what I think that would look like.
I tried to do that quicker than it would take to push a button. I want to give you 4 reasons. 4 reasons why I would say yes, with none of them meant to make you feel trapped in a difficult situation. And honestly, maybe it's better stated. Here's 4 reasons to consider why the answer to the question of whether a wife should submit to respecting a man who isn't living a respectable life may be yes. The answer may be yes because of these reasons. They should at least be considered. So the first is you're responsible for your actions and not his. And he will be held accountable by God for his actions and you for yours, and not the other way around. And if marriage is meant to be a picture of Christ's love for the church and the church's love for Jesus, if he is failing to live out his half of the picture, that doesn't prevent you from being able to glorify God by living out your half of that picture, that image, that covenantal display that marriage is supposed to be of Christ's love. And doing so actually has the potential to be doubly powerful in the lives of those who look in on your marriage, because on top of your faithful love and respect to a husband who is not deserving of it, by showing it, you get to demonstrate a undeserved love that is representative of the grace that Jesus shows to sinners. The second reason I would say that yes is to be considered is that all Christians are called to love their enemies. Not that I hope your spouse isn't one who qualifies as your enemy, but all Christians are called to love their enemies, live at peace with those who are around us as far as it depends on us. We're all called to forgive as we've been forgiven. We are all called as followers of Jesus to put the interests of others above our own in the way that Jesus did for us in imitation of him. And this isn't to say that you should silently endure mistreatment because that is your Christian duty. That is not what I am saying. In fact, this is one of the reasons Christian community is so important, so that there are people not just to gab about issues with and gossip and slander spouses behind their back with, but people to speak to, because there's going to be situations where a husband or a wife might feel their spouse is being unreasonable, is not treating them right, when in fact it is the person who is feeling that who needs to maybe learn a little bit about being gracious, or perhaps they are provoking that kind of behavior. But far more concerning, and why I kind of highlight this at this moment, is there are times where there will be mistreatment or abuse, and a spouse will feel that's normal. And so they should just put up with it and be silent and not speak out or seek help. And that is where Christian community can help speak into and help discern situations that are not normal, healthy, or to be just silently endured. So I'm only saying this in as far as the general principle for followers of Christ is not to treat others based on how they deserve it, but on how we've been treated by Jesus. And we've been focusing on this passage that speaks about marriage, and we'd be remiss if we didn't, if we just start in at Ephesians 5:22 there with wives submitting to their husbands and not read verse 21 that says, submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. In other words, out of reverence for Jesus, do what he said. And this is not just instruction for wives, but for all. Do unto others as you'd have them do unto you. Don't treat others the way they've treated you, but instead treat them as you would want to be treated. Don't retaliate. Answer hatred with love. Overcome evil with good. These are instructions that are for all followers of Jesus. And the way we deal with others with love and respect is not meant to be a reflection of how we're treated, but it's about obeying God. And honestly, especially in a marriage situation, it is God's power and love at work in you that really is our only hope or shot of treating someone not as they deserve, but as Christ has treated us. Now, the third reason I would say that yes is to be considered is just by going over a quick reminder of what submission in marriage does not look like, what that does not mean. Last week we talked about a number of things. To be submissive in marriage is not to give up the right to think independently. It's not giving up the personality that a wife has that is unique and God-given. It's not the ability to have opinions that's given up. It doesn't mean you have to agree with everything your husband says. You don't have to go along with immoral things that he might choose to do. It's not requiring you to just accept his faults and silently deal with it and never request that he change and move in that direction. And so if those are some of the things that submission to an ungodly husband would not look like, what might it look like? Thinking through this, a couple of practical things came up. It can mean choosing not to slander him in front of others, his character or his actions. And again, I'd rather say it 1,000 times than have it be missed. In this, I don't mean like failing to seek the counsel of trusted believers, sharing honestly with them for the sake of discerning what God's will is in a situation. I mean not just openly putting your husband down. Another way this could express itself, it can mean committing to a servant-hearted attitude, because one can still serve a spouse who is difficult to love, and this certainly goes both ways. And truthfully, it's one of the most effective ways to disarm hostility in a relationship. And so whether that's simple acts of cooking a favorite meal or stopping on the way home to pick up a special treat that they love, to thoughtfully serve someone doesn't require that they be deserving of it or even that they be grateful for it afterwards. You can still serve, and acts of service, the effort of it is pleasing to God, and it doesn't go unnoticed by him. And when it comes to areas of his life that are sinful or negatively affecting him and others, this doesn't mean silence, right? Love can cover over a multitude of sins. We see that in the scriptures, and in fact, it's a biblical thing. It's a glorious thing at times to just be able to overlook an offense, to just be able to extend forgiveness. But there's also an element where love speaks up, and love reveals the damaging effects of sin to those who don't seem to be noticing it themselves or taking it seriously. But again, in this, there are ways to do that respectfully, and there are ways that are not. There are ways to approach someone with a concern that is loaded with put-downs and ultimatums and sarcasm. There's contentious and combative ways to approach conflict, but there's also gentle and healthy ways that display love and kindness and make it clear that the desire in the end is reconciliation, is health, is wholeness, is restoration of a relationship, respect and thoughtfulness through and through. And we're going to read in a couple of minutes how gentleness and quietness are marks of inner beauty in a wife. As far as husbands go, and I'd always rather talk to you, I feel just a tad more personally qualified, maybe. You won't find, you can read the scriptures front to back and back to front. You will not find a command that says a husband must submit to their wife. Even still, there is no reason to think the bar is any lower. If your wife is making your marriage difficult, It's not okay to go and talk about it with the guys behind her back and bash her. It is not okay to put her down to her face. If you have to approach a problem, you have as much reason to be gentle when you do so, because it is a fruit of the Holy Spirit of God living in you. It is not a feminine trait. And lastly, and most importantly, the reason it may be yes when the question asked is, should I submit to a husband who is ungodly, is what the point of this passage was. Your faithfulness to him as a godly wife might be what leads to his salvation. That's the whole point of this passage. This is about a woman who loves Jesus and her husband doesn't. It's a challenging situation, and it's clearly not talking about a good husband who loves God. The whole context of this is the opposite of that. And the instruction to submit to him has nothing to do with his being deserving of it, has nothing to do with him leading in a way that is worth following. It has everything to do with the possibility that he might be won over to Christ, not by the way his wife talks about Jesus, but by her actions, by the purity and reverence of her life. And so yes, there are some situations where separation and divorce can be explored. There are many where that is not what God would intend for a husband or wife to pursue when faced with challenges, and that's not to minimize how difficult it is to love someone day by day who doesn't reciprocate it. But when it comes to what the right thing for you to do, whether you're a wife or a husband or anybody in a difficult relationship, I would really encourage you to seek out trusted, mature Christians to help you discern that. Because I think if you go online, you're going to find articles that tell you what you want to hear. You're going to find some that tell you what you don't want to hear, and it can be hard to sift through what really does apply. You want to be faithful to the Scriptures. The Scriptures speak plenty about marriage, about divorce, about forgiveness and reconciliation. What is the application of it and the principles of it to your situation? That's not as easy to explain in a general way that's applicable as it is to walk the walk with those who can help you by speaking the truth and faithfully speaking the truth. Those who you trust understand the Scriptures and what it means to apply the principles of it to your life. Those who are willing to help you see your blind spots. Those who are going to encourage you that for seasons God might be more interested in your holiness than in your happiness. And those who will encourage you to preserve the marriage covenant to the glory of God in almost every circumstance, while leaning on Jesus as your hope and your strength day by day. Now the next question really rolls into the rest of the passage, and that's why Sarah? Why does she call Abraham her Lord? Why is that what's pointed out? I mean, someone astutely pointed out in a question they sent to me this week, why would Peter choose Sarah as an Old Testament example of a godly, submissive wife when really it seems like there might be some better options to be imitated? I mean, Sarah, she went along with Abraham's lies. Abraham told her when they met Pharaoh to just lie and say she was his sister so that they wouldn't kill him. Pulls the same stunt later on when they meet another king. She gets her servant at some point to sleep with her husband so that they can have a son, and really shows both an immorality as well as a lack of faith in God in that. She certainly doesn't sit back. I mean, here she's called a submissive wife and praised as such, but she doesn't sit back and take direction from her husband. At points, she's the one making the decisions, and even God directly intervenes. When she's got an idea and Abraham's not comfortable with it, God just jumps in and says, listen to whatever Sarah tells you. That's when it comes to her as an example, she doesn't fit the stereotypical submissive wife who is weak and under the authority of a powerful man. And that's part of what makes her the perfect example, because those presumptions about what submission means don't fit her story, and that's part of why she's so good. And she had her flaws. Abraham had plenty of flaws as well. And in recognition of the fact that they're imperfect, there's still a number of reasons, as I pondered this, as I looked more into it, that she really does make a great example for godly women and for godly wives. First was her attitude towards Abraham. We'll go over three. First, her attitude towards Abraham. She had this willingness to follow the leadership of Abraham, and she showed it in her actions, she showed it in her words. And it's kind of funny that Peter chooses to reference the one time we have on record that Sarah refers to her husband as Lord, my Lord, like lowercase l, just this term of respect to one in authority. But I think honestly, you look at her life as an example, and what Peter does is he picks out the one time she said what she was so faithful in acting. And it sure wasn't meant to be a suggestion that wives call their husbands Lord. I read this cute little story where a wife, flopped down on the bed at the end of the day and said, "Oh, Lord, I'm tired." And her husband said, "In the privacy of our own bedroom, you don't have to call me that. You can call me Jim." And then that was the end of the story. I think the rest was redacted in the court documents. But Sarah, followed Abraham's lead from the start, that we can tell. I mean, Abraham's called by God to leave everything behind. Leave your country, leave your family, leave everything, and go without knowing where it is you're going. I'll just tell you on the way. Abraham goes, Sarah willingly goes with him. She followed in the lead about his lies about being his sister. Because the brother of a beautiful woman, in situations here, they're traveling, they come across Pharaoh. In situations like this, a brother of a beautiful woman who could be taken into the Pharaoh's harem would be, honored. But a husband would just be eliminated from the situation. Now, there is a greater principle that is just always binding. Christians have an ultimate allegiance to Jesus over and above any authority. So here in Peter, we've heard about, slaves and masters and citizens to government, and there's supposed to be submission. Here with spouses, there's no authority that we are supposed to listen to and obey if it means that we would be disobeying God as a result of it. And so we could just say, well, this is one of our slip-ups. It's not really applicable to this, and maybe so. But, I mean, I'm not going to be too hasty to judge her on this, because we find out later that it kind of was true. It was half true anyway, that Abraham and Sarah shared a father but not a mother, and their being married wasn't uncommon at the time. And so you think about it, what little kind of twist or half-truth would you be willing to tell if it was a life or death situation? What would my wife say if it meant that I would live or die? And no doubt, half-truths are lies in God's eyes, so I'm not trying to justify or say that it was right. I'm trying to empathize with it a little bit and just make this point. Recognize, even if in this instance she ought not have followed and submitted to his leadership, it's her consistent attitude of submission to Abraham's leadership that she is exemplified for. So that's not to say he always led her in the right way. That's not to say she had perfect discernment in what submission should look like. But as it speaks to her character being one in which she consistently yielded that leadership to him, we see it even in situations where there's immorality. We see it again when Abraham is taking his son Isaac to sacrifice him, which, if this is the first you're hearing of the story, don't worry, it doesn't end badly. Sarah's not mentioned in it, but it'd be hard to believe that she wasn't aware of what was going on. And in fact, it might well have been one of her greatest acts of faith in God and in her husband's plans to submit and let them go to the mountain where it was expected that Abraham would sacrifice Isaac. So the example she set was this voluntary willingness to follow Abraham's leadership as head of their family. And what makes it all the more admirable is understanding who she is. And she would have consciously chosen to do this. And my guess, it wouldn't have been all that easy for a woman like her, because she was not weak. She was not timid. She was no damsel in distress. She was a godly, confident, independent thinker. Her name, before it was changed to Sarah, was Sarai, which meant princess. She was a dignified woman. And God used her on occasion to straighten out her husband's thinking. And she was a beautiful woman, and everyone knew that. Abraham recognized it. And if she was less of a looker, Abraham wouldn't have been concerned as they traveled that they would meet these rulers, and these rulers would want her to be part of their harem. But he was, and rightly so, because Pharaoh saw her and wanted her as a wife. And when a king later on named Abimelech saw her, he wanted to take her into his harem. And this is when she's like 65 years old. So she was a beautiful woman, but her outer beauty was not the most beautiful thing about her. And that's the second reason she does make a great choice for an example, is the beauty of her inner character. And it's her inner beauty that really shone through her life. And that's what Peter starts by pointing to when he goes on in verse 3 of chapter 3. Your beauty should not come from outward adornment, such as elaborate hairstyles and the wearing of gold jewelry or fine clothes. Rather, it should be that of your inner self, the unfading beauty of a gentle and quiet spirit, which is of great worth in God's sight. For this is the way the holy women of the past put their hope in God, who put their hope in God, used to adorn themselves. They submitted to their own husbands, like Sarah, who obeyed Abraham and called him her Lord. You are her daughters if you do what is right and do not give way to fear. And this isn't to say jewelry and hairstyles and fancy clothes are bad, but understand as a woman, it is not what you ought to count on as you seek to be beautiful. When somebody recognizes that you are beautiful, it should be not simply because of what they can see with their eyes. It should be from what the blind could still see. I read a story this week that a young officer who was blinded during the war met and later married one of the nurses who was looking after him. And one day he overheard someone saying it was lucky for her that he was blind, since no one who could see would marry such a homely woman. And he walked toward the voice, and what he said is, I overheard what you said, and I thank God from the depths of my heart for the blindness of eyes that might have kept me from seeing the marvelous worth of the soul of this woman who is my wife. He said, she is the most noble character I have ever known, and if the conformation of her features is such that it might have masked her inward beauty to my soul, then I am the great gainer by having lost my sight. Outer beauty fades. It's inner beauty that is unfading, that grows. And two examples of that inner beauty which Sarah had are given: to be gentle and to have a quiet spirit, which is of great worth in God's sight. Now, what does this mean? If you think being gentle and quiet means you're weak and silent, you'd be dead wrong. The word gentle is also translated meek in the New Testament, and it sounds like weak, but it is not. It's a word used to describe Jesus. He even used it to describe himself. He was not weak. He was infinitely powerful, but his power was under control, and this is the idea of meekness in the scriptures. It's been a while since we've been able to take the girls horseback riding. We were doing it earlier this year, and horses scare me quite a bit. I'm getting quite a bit more comfortable, but I don't ever forget they're just like this 1,700-pound muscle that's poised to kick my chest in if it had any inkling to do so, and there's nothing I could do about that. But I've gotten to know these horses that we were going to see, and they've got personality, and I'd even call them gentle. You could get one of them to give you a kiss. Here's Leah doing that.
Kiss.
Oh, so nice.
But a 1,700-pound heap of muscle who is gentle is not lacking power. It's just power that is restrained, that's under control. And a wife isn't required to give up the strength of her character in order to be gentle. And if one forfeits the strength of her character because she thinks that's what being a submissive wife is, she and her husband have both lost because of that. A horse that is responsive to the leading of its rider would be considered a meek or gentle horse. Powerful, but I think that probably does it for me comparing wives to horses. I probably could have wrapped it up a little earlier even. But hey, at least it's not like Solomon who said, like a gold ring in a pig's snout is a beautiful woman who shows no discretion. That's a different kind of comparison altogether. But it does show you how much God values the inner beauty of character so much more than outer beauty. Likewise, this idea of being quiet doesn't mean silent. Look at Sarah. She's praised for being gentle and quiet, but she got in Abraham's grill from time to time. She had opinions and she made them known. And so we see that quiet can be articulate and persuasive. What it means is doing so with a spirit that is not combative or aggressive or demanding. Her quietness is a reflection that she's secure in who she is before God. She has enough confidence, she doesn't have to prove herself, and it's out of that confidence she is free to share the wisdom that God has given her, the insights that God has given her. And man, if a husband is not willing to acknowledge that he will only be better for listening to his wife, he is missing out. Kim has shown this to me to a T several times. I think it was a number of months ago. I might have brought it up on a Sunday. It was a couple of years ago, but I was struggling. Depression was kind of coming on hard, and I tried a couple of med changes. It wasn't working, and the last one was really scary with the thoughts that were coming to mind. So I really didn't want to try any more, and so I didn't want to get help. I just wanted to push through it, but that wasn't going well for me or my family. And Kim had this way when it was just the two of us out to dinner of looking across the table and just saying, so what's the plan? And I had been deferring, dealing with this, and it was for my good, it was for the good of our kids, and it was for her good. But the way she brought up this need for me to address my struggles was so tender, and she helped me point out what I couldn't see. It happened when we first got married, too. We were going to live in Saskatchewan. Remember last week I said we didn't know much? Just joking. I know there's somebody in Saskatchewan watching. I love you, and your flat province. We thought about living in Saskatchewan, and we looked at a house, 1930s heritage home, downtown in the city, Moose Jaw, so that explains it. And it's this heritage home. I think it was $38,000. Can't believe it. And I often joke about her saying, we can't live in Saskatchewan, right? And at some point she did say something like that. But the truth is, here we were looking at settling there, and it was wanting to stay because I clung to being needed. And there was a youth center there that we volunteered at that asked me to stay and work there. And I tell you how desperate I was to be wanted. This is what we were going to do with our lives. It wasn't a call from God. And she so graciously and patiently, gently prompted, asked questions, and helped me come to discover that. And she might say of me that she's proud as a husband where I've led our family, and I'm grateful she respects me and follows my leadership. But the truth be told, if left to myself, I would not have made the very best of the decisions that have led us to where we are without her wisdom, without her insight and discernment, and her way of sharing those in such a way as to empower me as the head of our little family. The last thing that makes Sarah such a beautiful example is her faith. In Hebrews 11, faith is defined in verse 1 of that confidence in what we hope for and assurance about what we do not. And then there's the hall of fame of faith of all these godly men through history, and then Sarah comes onto the scene in verse 11, and it says, and by faith even Sarah, who was past childbearing age, was enabled to bear children because she considered him faithful who had made the promise. In other words, Sarah hoped in God. And that's what chapter 3, verse 5 says, in the way holy women of the past put their hope in God. They made themselves beautiful, and that was a part of it. And Sarah didn't look at her barrenness. She didn't look at her age. She trusted in God. And not without wavering. That wasn't without a little laughter at the audacity of the promise from God that she, in her old age, and her husband, even older still, would have a son. But faith doesn't need to be a perfect faith for it to be a beautiful and powerful and exemplary faith. And it was her faith that caused her to do what was right in her life. I mean, we see it in verse 6, for you are her daughters if you do what is right and you do not give way to fear. It was her faith that allowed her, in relation to her marriage, but more broadly her whole life, that caused her to do what was right. When it came to her hope in God driving out fear, she was able to live without being stilted by the fear of going to an unknown destination and taking the journey. She was able to overcome the fear of what submitting to an imperfect husband might look like and result in for her. What made her beautiful was the inner beauty of her attitude and her character, and that her actions so truly lived out the reality of the depth of her faith. And it says, you are her daughters if you do what is right and do not give way to fear. And in so much as that applies to marriage, and this loops back around to the first question, one aspect of Sarah's faith as it revealed itself was her willingness to submit to her husband. And this was born out of and was only possible because of God. Her willingness to do so was born out of a conviction that doing so would fit God's plan for her marriage. And it was only possible because she had a hope and a faith and a trust in God, who is perfect and who is sovereign and works all things together, all circumstances, all trials, for the good of those who love him. And Peter's point is that a way a wife acts toward her husband should stem from her relationship with God. It is her hope in him that allows her to love her husband, whether he is deserving of it or not. And truly, wife or husband in a happy marriage or struggling, single, dating, divorced, whether we're talking about to a spouse or a parent or an employer or an adversary, love as Christ first loved you. To this we're called, and to look to God for hope in all circumstances, to spend more time in the cultivation of what's in our heart than refining the complexion of our skin, to let God work on developing the inner value of us, the parts that are unfading and best portray his love for all who see us to understand. Wives, women, this is an inner beauty that is of great worth in God's sight, and men, your calling is not all that different. For the fruit of the Spirit of God for all who are saved in Christ is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, and self-control. And Peter ends with this final note to husbands, saying, husbands, in the same way, be considerate as you live with your wives and treat them with respect as the weaker partner and as heirs with you to the gracious gift of life, so that nothing will hinder your prayers. Your wife, be considerate and respectful of her, the weaker partner. It's not something I advise you adopt as a pet name for her. But what this does is it refers to a couple of things. One, just a generality about physical strength. It's not always the case, but be extra cautious not to use any authority that you have in the relationship, any authority that's been empowered to you by the society or the culture in which you live. Don't use the size or strength of your physical character to intimidate or to domineer. Don't do anything which would be considered disrespectful or inconsiderate. And in reference to the cultural piece of it, women in this time had few rights, and they were discovering all sorts of freedom because of their newfound faith in Christ, because they were declared equal. And Jesus had set this example of respecting and hearing from women and treating them in a way that was foreign to the times. And although a wife may have had fewer rights in society, been suppressed or devalued, and so in the sense weaker in that they might be less influential, treat her in a way that shows a fundamental understanding that this should not be so. Because she is an heir with you in the gracious gift of life, every bit as much beloved as a child of God. And every action towards a wife should both be considerate and respectful, with it never being overlooked that she is a daughter of your God. And she is precious in his sight. And in the same way, wives would be asked to love their husbands not only if they're deserving. Understand your wife is worthy of your self-sacrificing love because what God has spoken over her. Because she is made in the image of God, because she is beloved by him, not because of how she's treated you this week. And if a husband adopts the role of headship, may it be with the understanding that the purpose of authority is to protect and bless the ones under the care, not to benefit the one in authority himself. And if a wife willingly chooses to submit to her husband in ways that imitate Sarah, not by forfeiting her strength or her character, not by giving up her ability to have unique opinions and use her God-given gifts, but respecting her husband and willingly trusting God to care for her in the midst of that, it need not depend on whether he's deserving or demonstrated competency in leading, but rather with obedience to the Lord and a hope securely rooted in him alone. Are we able to love as we've been loved, not by those in our lives, person to person, but by our Father in heaven? Let's pray. God, there's very little about this which is easy. To be called to live lives of self-sacrifice, to deny ourselves and take up our crosses daily, to lay down our lives that we might find true life in you, to love our enemies, to pray for those who persecute us, to repay evil with good, and to seek to overcome evil with good. None of this comes naturally to the sinful nature or the flesh in us. And yet you who are love, you who are truth, you who are life and light, are able to work through us in these ways. And so I pray you would, by your Spirit in us, allow us to see the world differently, to see the value in those who don't demonstrate that they are as valuable in your eyes as they are, at least as we see them. Give us the ability to love with patience and understand that our willingness to love unconditionally, if it might lead to someone coming and being won to Christ, is worthwhile. Help those who are in situations where this sounds devastating, to have to carry on. They're trapped, they're scared. Give wisdom and help them find the courage and find the people who will help them discern what God you desire for their lives. I pray that it is your wisdom, your will, your power that will bring about your kingdom on earth as it is in heaven. I pray these things in the powerful name of Jesus. Amen. Well, thank you again for joining us for Redemption Online this week. Hey, if you haven't signed up for our newsletter yet, I'm going to put a link in the chat box there. That's your best way at keeping on track. We've recently put out an update about what's ahead for the summer, what we know at this particular point in time. And so go ahead and sign up for that newsletter, and that's the best way for you to be able to find out what's coming down the pipe. I'll also put a link to that last update, just so if you haven't received it, you've got a sense of where the next few months are going to lead us and what it looks like to move beyond that. So God bless you. Have a wonderful rest of your weekend, and we will look forward to worshiping with you next week.